Good morning, Sylvia. Happy to see you. Oh, yeah. I've actually been really looking forward to this talk um, since we put it on the calendar. And then I just want to say, Diana, that song that you chose was perfect. Like to the point where I was wondering if you were peeking over my shoulder or looking at my notes or something. That was that was great. Thank you. So today we are talking about the origin story of science of mind. And I'm calling this talk Ancient Wisdom for a Modern World. So, have you ever wondered where these teachings came from? And who first said, change your thinking, change your life? That was our dear Ernest Holmes. So, science of mind did not appear out of nowhere. Ernest Holmes stood on the shoulders of philosophers, mystics, scientists, and spiritual teachers from thousands of years of human inquiry. So, 2 years ago, when I was at the Silomar for a SOAR conference, I attended a lecture that was given by the Science of Mind archives. It was really fascinating. And at that time, I purchased the book, Ernest Holmes at Asilomar, Lectures and Classes from the 1950s. It's a hefty book, like all of his are, most of them. He has some small ones. But I never really opened it until I was preparing for this talk. So it's time to open the book. There's some really wonderful references in here for exactly what it is that we're doing here in our teaching chapter. So, throughout his time as a public teacher, Holmes gave weekly Sunday messages in public halls. He taught many classes, wrote numerous books and magazine articles, broadcast his message on radio and TV programs, founded Science of Mind magazine in continuous publication today. By the way, I'm really, really enjoying this month and the daily guides written by Reverend Dr. Sonny Cantrell. Extraordinary. And he spread the message of Science of Mind to as many people as he could. He was driven to help people see that there was a power for good in the universe and that they could tap into it to create the lives they desired. How many of you guys know that Ernest never set out to start a church? In fact, he was pretty resistant to the idea. So the church was not really in the plan. So Ernest was born in 1887 in rural Maine. And he was not formally educated. He had very little formal education. But he was insatiably curious and a voracious reader. He would read anything he could get his hands on, and he absorbed all that he could of philosophy, religion, psychology, science, and mysticism. And one of his famous quotes is, "I did not originate this teaching, I discovered it." And I'm grateful that he's sharing it with us. So another really important thing to know about Ernest how he was raised and as he was growing up is that he was born into a family whose spiritual beliefs were as pure Congregationalists. Congregationalists. That's something we don't hear very often. but I believe that it was attached. It doesn't say specifically, but I believe that that is attached to the Quakers. Um, anyway, his parents encouraged reading the Bible, but did not want their children to take in any fear, calling them to ignore lectures on hell and damnation. Ernest, though, had a curious mind and sought out local sources such as the library to pursue other religious teachings, philosophy, and more. He grew up with an open and inquisitive mind, curious about the world and his place in it. So, of course, he was strongly influenced by a number of great thinkers of the time. So, of course, there's Mary Baker Eddy. Emma Curtis Hopkins was known as the teacher of teachers, Thomas Troward, and Emerson, to name a few. I mean, it was extensive, his studies. He researched wisdom from many spiritual traditions and paths. From Hindu philosophy, he looked into the divine within and unity of all life. From Buddhism, mindfulness, and the creative nature of consciousness. From Taoism, living in harmony with universal law. And from Greek philosophy, Plato, the world of ideas, Plotinus, the one, and divine emanation. Stoicism, living according to universal law. And Jesus's teachings. Jesus was the example, not the exception. The kingdom of heaven is within you. According to your faith, be it unto you. It is done unto you as you believe. But through all of these, there is a thread of all-sustaining beauty. He said something really profound that I want to quote directly because I don't want to mess it up. But through all of these, there is a thread of all-sustaining beauty, and you'll find it in every religion. God is. God is one. Good is the fundamental impulsion of the universe. Love is its motivation. Law is its propulsion or action. Then comes along the development of the New Thought movement. And he has this to say about that. He says, now, I do not know of any spiritual movement in the history of the world, modern, medieval, or ancient, that has ever accomplished through an organization a degree of freedom and individualization within an organized body as the body of religious science has in the last 30 years. Now, this is a lot to say because during this process, there was considerable disagreement. And some came in, and some go out, and some wonder why some came in. And some went out, and I never asked myself why they came or why they went because it's none of my business. I know this, that they have the only spiritual, that we have the only spiritually free to the individual organization organized enough to keep it from falling apart at the seams, and it's split several times at the seams, that the world has ever known. It gives promise for the future. And I just want to say here, reading some of these lectures that he gave at Asilomar gives me a completely different perspective on Ernest Holmes as a person. just an extraordinary individual who had so much humor and wisdom. And I realized that I was born the year after he died, so I never had, the personal. But so this is a very the closest I've come to getting a sense of the person that he was. He says, "I am not a prophet, else I would wear whiskers. I think whiskers are unsanitary and they itch my face. But I wouldn't be surprised that we may be laying a cosmic egg. It looks that way. It would be just a question of whether we sat on it long enough to hatch out a lot of chickens." Chickens, there's a theme. "Time will prove that. And beyond my time, I wouldn't be surprised if we do. It will be the most remarkable thing in the evolution of spiritual institutions if we do, because it has never been done before." And I will say that for myself, having been raised an educated Catholic, and then taking the very intentional path to turn away from organized religion, I love the fact that he is very clearly stating that we're only organized enough to not fall apart. But within this movement, there is freedom. There is freedom to explore and to question and to examine. And this is where the science part comes in, the science of mind. It is the melding of science and religion, which is the source of the original name of the movement, which was religious science. Science is replicable. You don't have to, we're not being told that we must take anything in this teaching on faith because some wise prophet who had whiskers said so. We don't have to take anything at that face value. We get to examine it in our own lives. We get to explore about whether or not this teaching shows up as truth in our experience of life. And that really is an amazing gift, because personally, I was done with the other kind. So some of his other influences that helped shape this whole philosophy come from people like Phineas Quimby, who wrote about how the mind influences health and that our beliefs shape experience. Of course, Emma Curtis Hopkins, the teacher's teacher, Thomas Troward, perhaps the greatest influence on him, who wrote extensively about mental law, universal mind, creative process, and Ralph Waldo Emerson, who wrote about self-reliance and the divine presence in every person and individual spiritual authority. That's where the science comes in religious science. So science meets spirituality, and Holmes admired scientific inquiry. The universe operates according to discoverable laws. Spiritual principles are reliable. We can experiment with them through practice. And spiritual laws are consistent and they can be demonstrated. So, why does this matter today? Why does it matter today? It matters more today than it ever has before, I believe. He says, "The next thing to know, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Religious science is free from superstition and the awe of theology. The great appear great because we are on our knees. That's a quote from James Larkin. Let us set up and act as though we are grown-ups. There are no prophets other than the wise. Even all the Bibles that were ever written were written by people just like you and me. We are not in awe of anything. I imagine there's a lot of people in a lot of rooms today where if they heard those words, they would clutch their pearls and scream blasphemy. People frequently say to me, what is your authority? I mean, well-meaning people. They wish me well. I always say the authority of our word is what it does. We ask no background for our work, other than what we leave behind us when we advance into the foreground of the universe, to that broader horizon, and there is no other. There is no law in the larger life, but that your own soul shall set it under the one great law of all life. Now we must be careful not to become dogmatic over the little we know, not to create another closed system that shall be the wonder of the world for a little while. Probably most of you, well, all of you have been around for some time, that you've heard the term open at the top. And that is part of our philosophy. We are always evolving, learning, growing, becoming immersed in the wisdom that is emerging all of the time. So we are open at the top. We are not a closed system. There is no dogma. There is no requirement in science of mind that one must embrace a set of beliefs in order to be saved. He cautioned against dogma and rigid interpretations. Ernest Holmes did not set out to be a minister. I always wondered about that. It's like, who ordained Ernest? He started the church. Who ordained him? He didn't set out to start a church. He was pretty resistant to it. And, he actually set out to be a student. He was on that path of discovery. His ministry began not with a vision to build a church, but with a desire to share ideas that transformed his own understanding. And what a gift that was for us. And so most of you in this room remember when the organization was split into two different factions. There was the United Church of Religious Science, and then there was Religious Science International. And that was a very painful part in our history. And it all came down to, it was never anything about the philosophy. It was always about the organization. The United Religious Science Church was quite determined that there should be a central point of authority, for lack of a better word. They wanted it to be centralized, and it really was about the education of practitioners and the ordination of ministers. The United Religious Science Church wanted that to be a central authority for those things. And Religious Science International felt that it should be up to individual communities to educate practitioners and ordain ministers along their own guidelines. I guess maybe we could equate that to, our national states' rights kind of format. That could give you an idea of how that came about. The split itself was very painful for Ernest personally. And he knew that eventually we would come back together because we are one. And we did come back together. The process took 8 years. Anybody remember that? Yeah. At the time, I was very, very interested in that. And I was attending, each year I would attend the conventions and listen to the speakers and um, have a front row seat to the coming back together. And then it was complete. And it was a joyful celebration and has been ever since. And personally, I kind of um, don't think about it very often. It seems like that was a long time ago. But the lived truth in my own experience was very real because I lived in South Lake Tahoe and I was a practitioner, and there's no CSL in South Lake Tahoe. I was a practitioner down in Carson City when there was a Center for Spiritual Living there. So I drove up and down the mountain, an hour, and to be part of that community. And then when that community came apart and dissolved, I was sort of homeless, kind of. The Center for Spiritual Living, they weren't called that then. It was still called Religious Science International, I think, was up here on the North Shore, but I had no awareness of it because it was in the other part. So it wasn't listed in the directory. I had no idea this community was here. And it wasn't until the coming back together that it got onto my radar that there was, in fact, another religious science community. Yeah, Sylvia. So the official joining back together was in 2011. So the years that I'm speaking about are really between 2003 and pretty much up to that point. Yeah. So that's amazing. It's like I had cousins and I didn't even know I had cousins. And you were still an hour away. You were just an hour away the other way. but I was no longer without my spiritual family, my spiritual community. And I kind of like doing, preparing this work and doing this research and thinking about how I had a personal experience of that split and how grateful I am that that is in the past. And there was a lot of, there were a lot of people that were deeply, let's just say they had very strong opinions one way or another. And someone, I don't remember who said it. It was someone very significant, but this was before the joining together. They, I don't know. I guess I'll research that. I'll research and get back to you and let you know exactly who said it, although I don't know how important it is. But what they said was that we won't come back. They said not enough people have died. We're not ready to come back together. And what they were talking about is that the old guard, the ones that split initially, that were so committed to their position that it split the community, until those people had passed on, we wouldn't come back together. And it kind of did happen like that because the split happened way back in the late 1950s. And we didn't come back together until 2011. But we are together now. So, anybody learn anything today about the origins of science of mind? Anyone surprised that Ernest didn't want to start a church? That he was pretty opposed to the idea? Yeah. He was very cautious about the idea of rigid interpretations. And one of his strong influences from Christian Science, Mary Baker Eddy, that's one of the things about Christian Science is they are not open at the top. The only readings that are sanctioned or permitted are her writings, and there's no expansion to that. So he was strongly influenced by her. Um, there was a lot of truth in her writings, but she closed the door after that. So that's it. That's all the truth there is. If I ever had any belief in that, as in the Bible is all the truth there is, that 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 closes the door on a great deal of wisdom that came before and that has emerged after. And the universe is continuing to expand, and we are continuing to expand and grow. The green growing edges of wisdom and understanding is what brings us all back together to the unified whole. So take a breath with me and join me in prayer. In the prayer that Ernest Holmes taught us in the way to engage with the one power, the one presence, the one light, wisdom, love, beauty, and joy that is the truth of all creation. I know that I am one with this one with this power, that I am created by it and of it. The very substance of God is what I am. Knowing this truth, embodying this knowing, all life is blessed. All beings are lifted up. All healing is accomplished through the revelation of the truth of this knowing, that God is all there is, and I am one with that. So I give thanks with an open and grateful heart for those that came before, for all the sages and saints, for all the prophets, for all the wise that informed the teacher who taught me how to live again, who opened my heart and opened my eyes to this truth. I give thanks for Ernest Holmes and for the community that gathers in his memory and in his design for freedom, for wholeness, for unity. I release my word into the law, knowing that it is return fulfilled. And together we say, and so it is.